There are two kinds of people in this world. The people who fail to do what they know they should, and those who keep doing things they know they shouldn't. Guess what? You're both. Hi, I'm your host, life and business coach, Marcy Barker, aka your loving kick in the pants. In this podcast, I'll teach you the 6 steps of my accountability code that will help you wake up with clarity and show up with aligned action steps that make follow through easy and peaceful. All right, let's jump in.
Hello, my beautiful people. I'm excited to be here today. Last night, I went to an event. It was a live podcast. So people sat in a room and listened to 3 people talk over the microphone while their tech person recorded the whole thing. And I was like, that is pretty cool. And I think I would like to do that one day. Not any time in the future, though. I was telling people how I have a podcast and I've been doing pretty good. I've been consistent every single Wednesday with an episode, and we're on like episode 67. So we're doing pretty good. And shout out to Drea and Jezza who helped me with my podcast. So it would not be possible without them. So I was telling people that I just record my podcast in my car on my phone, sometimes over Zoom, and sometimes with a legit mic and stuff. Hopefully you guys can't tell because I think the audio sounds great enough for us to keep going. So going to that event last night, it was really cool to just reignite my reasons for having my podcast, and also a reminder of consistency is very important, and it's very important to me too. So I was looking through the podcasts of other people and they had a break or they admitted that they didn't get things out on time. And I just was like, I don't want to be like that. So here's my commitment to making sure that you continue to get an episode every single Wednesday regarding your loving kick in the pants. Here's another thing that I am committing to you is that I want this podcast to be really motivational. I want you to listen to it and feel like, okay, I'm going to take action now because this is the loving kick in the pants that I needed. And that's why I listen to this podcast. So when we dive into each and every episode, it is very imperative that you understand what the code is so that you can apply it in a very meaningful way. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be an expert on the code to take action, not by any means. However, my big promise to you is that follow through becomes easy and peaceful when you learn to master the code and create your own personal version of the accountability code. So, like I said last week, what we're going to do is talk about my program of the accountability code and how you can learn to master it. And we are starting on March 11th. So that means we have 2 more weeks of podcasts before we dive in. And then the subject matter will change a little bit based on the real world experiences that I'm having with my clients who are in the program. So this week, I'm going to explain the accountability code to you again in a way that hopefully you feel desirous of taking action in these 3 steps. And then next week, I'll go over the second 3 steps of the accountability code so that you can really focus on that aspect. So what I want to do today is dive into the accountability code and tell you the steps, because once you memorize the steps, it makes it easier for you to take action. And you guys, I freaking wrote the code and it took me a long time to memorize the steps because it was a new thing to me and I had to really test out if following the steps were necessary to take action. And I tried to turn it even into a cute little acronym for it to be easily remembered, and it just wasn't happening. And I was like, these are just the steps that have to happen. And I think we can explain them in a lot of different ways, but ultimately, if you learn the steps, memorize the steps, then you get to apply what that means for you guys. So what I want to tell you first is how I created the accountability code. I'm going to try and pare this story down because it can be really long. Somebody sent me a video of a speaking engagement I did at a retreat and I watched it and I was like, this is really good. But I was like, why did I spend 20 minutes on the first step? So I'm not going to do that to you again. But in a nutshell, the accountability code was born because I was commissioned to write a book, and that's how I'm going to say it. Somebody told me, you're going to write a book to establish yourself as an expert in your field. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to write a book, but I will do it because I'm competitive. And you're telling me that if I write a book, I'm going to have an advantage over people in this competition that I'm in. So I did everything they told me to. I showed up, I wrote the draft, I went through the exercises, and I did it all. And I just hung my actions on their every word. If you do this, then this will happen. If you get this to us by this date, then we can get this done by that date. And so I hung on to their every word and I did it all. And if you guys know, you've probably heard, I spent 5 weeks in Guatemala writing my book, knocking this thing out because I was told it was going to be a guaranteed done deal to have a book published. And at the end of that deadline, I told them, I said, my book is done. Please, it's your turn to edit, design, and publish like you promised. And they kept telling me this book is not done. And I was so mad. I was like, you guys, I did exactly what you told me to. I promise I followed it to the T because that's the kind of person I am. And they were like, no, this is not done. So I sat on the train for an hour. I had to fly out of town for another filming day. And please keep in mind, I was just recovering from COVID. I did not want to do any of this, but I sat on the train for 1 hour and I was like, this is what I have to do. You guys, actually, the accountability code wasn't even born until the very last stretch. And so sometimes that's just how it happens for us in our lives, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. So I sat on the train and I reflected. That's the first step of the accountability code, reflection. So reflection is thinking on your goals, your values, and your problems. And before, this book was a goal, but now is like, this is a problem. This is a big problem because I want to get this done and I just want to be finished and I just want to be healed. I want to feel better and I just want this finished. So my reflection was, please, let's just get this done. I've been working on this for almost 9 months and I'm ready to be done. The second step of the accountability code is humility. So humility is where I had to come to Jesus moment. And I said, Heavenly Father, please help me get this done so that all of my work is not a waste. I do not want to have spent 5 weeks in Guatemala without my family for this to be a waste. And keep in mind, a lot of other things were happening. You guys, I wrote the accountability code when I was at one of my lowest points in my life. My mom had just left my dad after 40 years. My family had just been kicked out of the place we were living because a relationship was dissolving. It was just, I was getting over COVID and I just wasn't doing well in that moment. And I asked Heavenly Father, please help me finish. Please help me get this done because I don't want it to be a waste. And if I don't have a book that comes out, then it kind of is a waste. So then after having that come to Jesus moment, I made a plan, which is the third step of the accountability code. The plan was, I'm going to sit here and write for 1 hour. And my plan is to explain to my future readers how accountability is something that starts internally. It's something that you have to be converted to on the inside in order for it to come to fruition externally. So those 3 steps, reflection, humility, and planning, those are the first 3 steps of the accountability code. My book is called The Accountability Code, Wake Up and Show Up. Spoiler, those first 3 steps are you waking up, you becoming aware and honest about your situation in a way that propels you to start taking action. I also tell my clients, reflection, humility, and planning can all be done on your couch. Like you can do this just with your brain only. So that's the wake up part. You're getting up and you're becoming aware of what you need to do. So I will focus more on the second half of that story in next week's podcast.
Hey listeners, the message of waking up and showing up is yours for the taking. In fact, it's free. I've recorded my entire audiobook and I'd love for you to consume it between episodes. Head to marcybarker.com to get instant access to the accountability code, Wake Up and Show Up. All right, let's jump back in.
As we continue talking about the accountability code, one of the things that I realized was so important is, in my intro to my podcast, everybody fits into 2 categories. You're either doing things you know you shouldn't, or you're not doing things that you know you should. And I really thought this was interesting because as I was creating my brand new course, my updated version, was that those 2 categories of people, some people wake up, but they don't show up. And some people show up without truly waking up. And that's where the disconnect comes in being accountable and aligning ourselves in mind and body. So when it comes to the accountability code and waking up, I want you all to take a second to think about what are the things that you have woken up to, because I've shared this before, but I'm sure it goes to a new person every single time. My book, the initial title was supposed to be called Stunning Awareness. And stunning awareness was this idea that you have an experience in your life that forces you to look at things differently, where you have this new perspective or this new understanding that changes you so deeply on the inside that you're like, I have to act differently. Let me tell you something. This is actually really embarrassing, and I think that I can share it because I do better now, but it was also a long time ago. When I was raising my kids, I had 4 kids in 6 years, and I remembered reading the conversations in moms groups about like, what do you do if your kid bites? And I remember people saying, well, you have to bite your kid back, or you have to let the kid understand the hurt. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to bite my kid. But one thing I did do to my oldest child, the guinea pig, was I would put her arm in her mouth and I would push on her jaw so she would bite herself. And I was like, okay, I think that this maybe is working. I don't know. She really didn't have a problem with biting. Maybe it was like hitting or slapping. And I was like, I'm not going to hit or slap her. But maybe if she feels what biting herself feels like, maybe she'll stop doing it. And you guys, if you're a mom, you know those moments where you go through these experiences and you're like, I have no idea what to do. This did not come with a rule book or a guidebook or anything. And I think we were still having some problems with my daughter just being a little bit too physical with all of her little sisters. And I remember after she hit, I was like, in the heat of the moment, I took her hand and I made her punch herself. But one time, my 2 oldest were fighting with each other, hitting each other, and I took both of their hands and I made them hit themselves. But this time, my daughter's fist or hand did not make contact with her own face. My fist made contact with her face. And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I just punched my kid. And I did not like the way that felt at all. I did not like it. And in that moment is one way I would describe stunning awareness of in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do things differently because this is not what I want to live by. I have a new understanding that I don't have a choice. I have to show up differently. I have to figure things out. And from that day on, I decided I was never, ever going to use that lesson to try and teach my kids not to hit each other. And as we've gotten older, there's a lot of things I've learned. And I learned that I don't like to use force on my kids at all. And even my youngest one, I was reminded she's very petite. And a lot of times we would pick her up and remove her if she wasn't listening. And she just felt so out of control with her body that she started making it very clear, do not touch me. Do not touch me. And I was so grateful for that. I was so grateful for her standing up for herself, but also as a reminder to me and my husband, like, no, don't. She deserves to have her space, and we can't just solve our problems by physically picking her up and moving her. And you guys, that's how accountability starts, is on the inside of you having an awareness that you say, you know what, I'm going to do things differently. Because when you fall into the category of doing things you shouldn't and not doing things you should, again, we all fall into both of those. It's accountability happens when you first realize that something has to change. And so stunning awareness, again, is the idea, like you have an experience where you have no choice but to show up differently because you've been converted mentally or emotionally. And when I told my publisher, I was like, here's the title of my book. He's like, that's stupid. That doesn't resonate with anybody. I was like, okay, I'll trust you. So the accountability code was the title of the book, but you guys, the accountability code wasn't even born yet in terms of that. So, okay, next week, I'm going to share with you the other half of that story of how the accountability code came to be. We will talk about implementing, we will talk about commitment, and we will talk about feedback. But as you are going throughout your day today, and even if you're able, pay attention to how you go about your next week until the next podcast comes out, and think about, what does waking up look like for me? What does it look like when I am thinking about my goal that is now a problem? What does it look like when I have a come to Jesus moment? Do I wait until I'm at the lowest point in my life to do that? Or do I come to Jesus, or whatever your method of belief is, sooner than what you need? And then lastly, planning. How often are you planning out your months, your weeks, your days, your moments? Are you taking control and power over what you can do? And I want you to know that as you listen and you implement the accountability code, you will have a deeper understanding of yourself. And I feel like that's the goal of life, is for you to understand where you came from, what you're here for, and the reasoning behind it. So as we end up this podcast today, I just want to remind you guys, you have so much power. You have so much control in your life, and your ability to be accountable is 100% based on you. You have the ability to be accountable to what really matters, so that you don't have to give a crap about all the things that don't matter to you. So if you also want to go through the accountability code and experience this in real time with me, definitely book a call with me. My calendar is always open for you guys. You can just go to marcybarker.com, pick a time that works for you, and we can talk about how the accountability code can manifest itself in massive ways in your life. And then also, if you want to get a head start on the program is done and ready for you to take advantage of. And then when we start on March 11th, we can hit the ground running. And it's just going to be so amazing for how many things you're going to get done, and to crush that big goal that you're thinking of, whether it's a business goal or a relationship goal or a personal health goal as well. So I will catch you all next week. I hope that you have been motivated today, because I definitely want to make sure that my podcast is something that brings you value every single week. And if you haven't yet, I would love a rating and review on my podcast. I just think that that's a cool way to reward consistency in a podcast. It should be growing. So thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you next week for another episode of Your Loving Kick in the Pants.
Hey friends, I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Your Loving Kick in the Pants. If you got any value out of this episode, I would love for you to drop me a review or share with a friend what you learned. All right, I'll see you next Wednesday for Your Loving Kick in the Pants.